Not many people know more about synthesis than today's guest. He's probably programmed the factory presets on some of your favorite modern synthesizers. He's a section lead of digital composition at Austin Community College. Please welcome Francis Preve back to the Music Production Podcast. This episode of the Music Production Podcast is sponsored by Baby Audio, makers of creative instruments and effect plugins. Baby Audio is all about inspiring tools that add color to your mix. Whether it's that retro lo-fi goodness of Super VHS or the futuristic physical modeling of their new synth Atoms, I'm really falling in love with the analog model BA1 synthesizer for its classic 80s synth sound. It even has a control that recreates and exaggerates the instabilities and chaos a battery-powered synth would have as its battery dies. That's the kind of stuff they do in all their plugins. Go to babyaud.io to learn more and take 15% off any order with the code MPP15. That's babyaud.io and use the code MPP15 to save 15%. Francis, welcome to the show again. Great to have you.
Great to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, a little bit. I still think you're one of the most frequent guests here.
Oh my God.
So it's nice to have you back and catch up with you. You're doing awesome stuff as always. Congrats on the new Serum Models.
Yep.
That's the newest release. And
Yes.
I got to tell you, like listening to your video, demonstrating it, I would have thought these are samples, these were realistic instruments there. And it's just another testament to your prowess as a sound designer, and really cool stuff. Can I ask you to share a bit about that?
Yeah. The concept for the pack came out of a conversation. I was at a conference. There were quite a few engineers there. Some of them were physical modeling engineers. And I had already been doing a lot of pretty significant physical modeling recreations. Like I had a tabla coming out of Ableton just using a noise burst and the Ableton Echo device because the filters on the Echo device, if you play with them while you've got the feedback really high in a very short delay, I was able to get this sort of tabla sound out of it. And I've always to give some props to where a lot of physical modeling comes from. Back in the late 70s, really early 80s, Kevin Karplus and Alex Strong were doing experiments with delays. And they stumbled across, in the same way that John Chowning stumbled across FM while he was playing with a modular, they stumbled across the fact that a quick impulse, noise burst, hi-hat, that sort of thing, is going to give you the sound of a plucked guitar. And the sound of a comb filter is almost identical to a delay. So I was at this conference and I was showing some of the stuff, and an engineer at the conference and I were talking, and I made the mistake of saying a lot of physical modeling is just smoke and mirrors. And I got in a lot of trouble for saying that. So he got very angry at me, and I had to sort of show him the tabla and show him some of the plucked string sounds. So fast forward a few years, in January 2022, I guess it was, I was visiting a friend in Mexico, and that friend happened to be Steve Duda. And we were talking about all the different ways you can make Serum sound not like Serum, because everybody associates Serum with these EDM sounds, these dubstep sounds, rhythm, so many genres have come out of Serum. And I'd showed him a couple of things I was playing with, and he was like, that's really pretty freaking cool. So 2 years ago, I started the project. And between, the inevitable imposter syndrome that no one will ever be able to escape, between that, I just kept fiddling with it. I know that the internet is a cruel, mean place. So I had to make sure it was perfect and bulletproof to my artist friends, and bulletproof not just to me. Like, I had to ask myself and my friends, am I losing my mind here, or is this working the way I think it is? A lot of the things with regard to the sound creation itself is it's not relying on any oscillators. It's relying, just like most physical modeling synths, on a noise generator and a comb filter with some heavy processing. There's a lot of flexibility in the comb filters inside Serum. It's sort of absurd how much flexibility there is. And then it's got all the effects at the end. And 3 envelopes. So I really started tinkering with it for the first 6 months of 2022. And I realized I'd created my own initialized presets that I could then modify further, and either, like, the strings really came out of me attempting to just get the sound of a violin or a viola. And then I was able to create many more types of string sounds from that. The plucks and guitars, but through experimentation, I was able to create different kinds of plucked instruments. There's a wonderful, I'm very proud of it, Kodo in there, which has a little bit of that pitch bend that we associate with the instrument. And then again, percussion, these sounds just started coming out of it. So once I had about 40 or 50 initialized starting points for myself, I just took it further until I got to 100, and made sure that each one was sufficiently different. I'm going to be a little long-winded here, but I guess we're here to promote in some sense. So the macros, the thing about physical modeling is it's very, very, very difficult even if you have a synth that's dedicated to physical modeling. And since the filter is occupied doing creating the actual sound, I use the macros for things like increasing the decay time, or modifying the sound by modifying the noise sources. And then, of course, like one for effects at the end. So I made the macros actually all do something. A lot of times I'll see Serum presets from Nameless that have the macros just not set to do anything. And having worked for so many companies, and they're always, make sure you got the macros in there, I did the macros like I would if I was working for a client, which I've done with I've done 4 packs for Xverse. So, I'm always making sure that the macros are really on point. And that is the whole story.
So it's interesting that it's such a long process too, and I love that it starts out with a sort of foot in your mouth moment, kind of making a comment, then it's like now you have to back it up.
Yeah, now I have to back it up. No,
right.
Yeah. So,
but it turns into a cool project like this.
I was so happy with the way it started turning out. But the other thing when you're making a pack, as you well know, is it's one thing to make the pack, but then you have to spend another 3 to 4 months on your marketing. And I'm just one guy. So 3 to 4, so writing the press releases, working with a PR person to clean them up, having to do the video that you see on YouTube. I originally started that in ScreenFlow, and then the PR guy jumped in and made some really, really valuable recommendations. But then you also have to create the demo music. So I had my buddy Shadowstar, I'd like to talk about him a little bit later. Really, really gifted techno producer, and he's definitely going places. So I asked him to do the techno stuff because he's better at it than I am. But that whole process of the demo music, I don't think people really consider what goes into making a pack. It's not just the sounds. You have to do the artwork, you have to do the video, you have to make the music, you have to do the description, you have to review that for a few weeks to make sure that the not just the description is accurate, but that it doesn't sound like hyperbola. A lot of times I'll look at product announcements And you'd think there was also like a cheese grater and a motorcycle in it. And
Right.
I really would rather, I really want to stay true to the identity of the product. So,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a hard part. Sometimes I don't even know how to present it. You know, okay, I know I made this thing that in a certain way with certain sounds, but what do you call it? What do you name it? What kind of art goes with this? And yeah, that's my least favorite part of the whole process too.
right,
It's just
right.
all of that stuff. And like you, I'm just one person trying to figure it out and uh just kind of pick something and hope it works. And sometimes I think things I've done probably would have caught on better if I had a different approach to that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I love this pack, but like it's not, people don't understand it. You know, it's hard to convey like why this is interesting because it's you sort of need to hear it and play with it.
I completely feel you on that. And you've done some amazing packs. The VHF stuff was really, really cool. And in this particular case with this pack, people don't think of Serum as a physical modeling synth. And if I had released it last year, I don't know if it would have gotten any traction because there's this sort of wave on physical modeling and everybody's releasing their own physical modeling synth to something more modern because there have been several out there. But the idea of just $29, Serum's a physical modeling synth, have fun. That was the goal there.
Well, I think even the concept, physical modeling, like what even is that? What does that mean for so many people?
That's why I got in trouble.
Yeah, you kind of said it a little bit, but maybe I can get you to just explain that a little more. Because, you know, like a normal synthesizer, the sound generator is usually some kind of oscillator that's repeating. But the physical modeling stuff is meant to, like, the most experience I have with something like that is like Corpus inside of Ableton. And you can pick like how you're going to strike the whatever medium it is. You pick the medium. Is it a string? Is it a membrane? And I really don't understand what's doing any of that stuff. I'm just listening and using these weird metaphors that they have for these different parts of the sound. So
in my current courses, I have an entire module for my sound design course that covers what physical modeling is, and I use Collision for that. If you go into the mallet and it says noise generator, these impulses are generally mallets and noise generators. So what it does, let's just go back to Kevin Carplus and Alex Strong. So Carplus Strong synthesis is what it's called. If you take a hi-hat or a kick drum or a snare drum and you put it into a delay, now what a delay is something that obviously repeats something. And if you have a 500 millisecond delay, it's going to sound like an echo in a canyon. And the amount of times it repeats as it gets quieter and quieter and quieter is determined by the feedback. Now, if you're using that same delay as a flanger, you're going to want to use very, very short delay times. And that's where Carplus Strong kind of came out of it. Because when it's a flanger, dialing up the feedback, you're going to start to hear a pitch. That's the sort of whooshy ripping sound of a flanger, is the fact that it's a very short delay. So if you start spending some time on the math in it, a short delay is like, if you set it to 1 millisecond, there's a question I always ask my class. If you set a short delay with high feedback to 1 millisecond, what's the frequency you're going to hear? And it's 1,000 hertz. And the reason being is that delay is constantly cycling your hi-hat or whatever your impulse was.
1,000 milliseconds in a second.
Yeah, there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. And if you change it to 2 milliseconds, it goes down to 500 because there are 500 like 2 millisecond intervals in a second. So I really don't. I'm terrible at math, but so making this, I had my calculator out the entire time I was doing this. So I mea culpa. But when you go to 2 milliseconds, it's 500. When you go to 4 milliseconds, it's 250. And it goes lower and lower and lower in pitch until it sounds like a rattle, and then it eventually becomes an echo. But when you can go shorter than that, it's really compelling, because if you can get it down to half a millisecond, now you're up to 2K. So what's happening there is if you take that flanger concept and apply it to a comb filter, which is essentially a flanger. So you apply that to a comb filter, and you in a comb filter, you can increase the resonance. When you increase the resonance on a comb filter, that's the feedback on a flanger. So when you're playing with comb filters, and every company has comb filters. So if looking at the structure of the comb filter, whether it's, and in the case of Serum, it's called flanger, it's called comb filter, it's got negative feedback, it's got positive feedback. There are some phasers in there, and they all do something really interesting if you set the resonance to maximum. So having worked with it for as long as I had, because this was a 2-year project, you find these sort of little shortcuts and back alleys where you can heavily modify the behavior of the comb filter. So there was a lot of experimentation with that. That's took the bulk of a year up. And really exploring what Serum's implementation of these flangers and comb filters, et cetera. And every time I found something, save the preset. Every time, oh, this sounds like a horn, save the preset. Oh, this sounds like a drum, save the preset. Once you find enough of these starting points, as I was saying, then you start working with things like the envelopes, because the envelope of, you can do this in collision. If you're working in collision, you take the envelope, you can envelope the noise. I'm going to take a minute to pontificate about the fact that it used to be a visual envelope, just like all the other envelopes in Ableton, and now it just says ADSR with some numbers. Makes it harder for me to teach. I'm not complaining about Ableton, but that user interface changed between 10 and 11, and as a professor, it just makes it a little harder for me to teach, because you're looking for the shape of an envelope in the user interface. So now that I've said that, in the case of Serum, you've got all these envelopes that you can clearly see what's going on. And if you want to do an instrument like a Kodo, as I was saying earlier, you're going to have to put a pitch envelope on it to get that effect. And if you want to control it by velocity, so that the harder you hit a key, the more that you get that pitch effect, which is the way most fretted stringed instruments work, is if you really, really hit a note hard, you're going to get a little pitch blip at the beginning of it. So that's an envelope tied to pitch, controlled by velocity. And you get deeper and deeper into it. But it's really, there's so much experimentation when you have all these filters out, that it's like the thing that I dislike about certain modular approaches. It's like the minute you find something cool, save it, because you can use that as a launch point for something else. So that's a lot of times, especially when I get a new synth or I want to do a lot of experimentation, I just kind of let my mind go, and I get into that sort of flow state, and I just save everything that's good, and then I have all the good things and I go back to them, and those are the ones I finesse and figure out what's doing what. So with a lot more.
So modular, you don't save anything. You're just.
Yeah, and in a very good way. I think the thing about modulars is that they're really good psychologically. It's like, and you can create stuff that you would never have created any other way, because a lot of times you're blindfolded. You're just kind of like, what does this do? What does that do? But so the Zen state that a modular creates, which I think is fantastic. I know several friends with modulars, and I love playing with them. It's kind of like, those sand mandalas that are just like the Tibetan monks they create these sand mandalas, and they're intricate and they're beautiful and they're complex and they take forever to make. And then at the end, you wipe the slate
Destroy it,
clean. Yeah. And that's kind of how modulars seem to work to me. So you can get great results, but unless you record it or find a use for it immediately, you're always going to go back to square one. So.
Yeah, so it's really, it's a lot of physics, I guess, as is a lot of synthesis, but especially here now where really the mathematics of it come into play.
And DSP engineers, and when they're making a proper physical modeling synth, they're creating these things called waveguides. And these waveguides are exactly what they do is they guide this pulse, this Karplus strong pulse or whatever it happens to be, through these very detailed recreations of an acoustic body. When you're talking about, say, something like an acoustic guitar, or a drum, like in the case of membrane and collision. And I found other ways to do it besides using waveguides that got identical results. And the cool thing is the techniques that I was using, since they weren't waveguides, are far easier on CPU. If you look at a lot of physical modeling synths, they hit the CPU really hard. And because I'm using Serum, and it's just basically a noise burst and a comb filter, that's super easy on CPU. So you can get a lot of polyphony out of it too.
So is it a matter of using the comb filter's resonance to recreate the kind of natural harmonics and, that creates a timbre
100%.
of our instruments? Yeah.
And different types of noise are going to give you different results, and different types of, whether you're using a hi-hat or, a snare drum or whatever, that's going to get there's so many moving parts, but once you get the hang of it, it would take it took me 2 years to make the pack. So there's a lot of that heavy lifting was 2 years of my own experimentation. But if you stay with it, I mean, I just have 100 presets so far. If this sells, I'll probably make a Models 2 and take it further and even more twisted. Or try it with a different synth. But Serum is just so flexible that I end up, every time I think of I wonder if it can do this, it does that. So there you have it.
Yeah, it's wild. And if it took you 2 years to do it, I know you're a guy, I've seen your videos and demonstrations of you teaching where you're developing fairly complex synth sounds in 60 seconds. Just because what's going to happen. Yeah.
Time. My students are often startled by the fact that I have the ability to work rather quickly with sound. But every time I create a sound, I'm like, oh, these are the ingredients. It's like a recipe. So when what sound did I just do for my students? I also did a 303, which is very straightforward. I mean, it's never going to sound exactly like Roland circuitry, so there is a need for the model. But making a 303 sound, it's like every time I hear a 303, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's either a saw or a square, one oscillator, cutoff, resonance, decay. There you have it. Boom. Make a sort of randomish sequence and add some glide. So some people are going to be mad that I simplified it that much, but essentially that's what's happening. So you start, once you've been doing it for something known as all your life, it's like breathing at some point. It's like you as a writer, because you're a very capable writer. You don't have to diagram your sentences anymore, do you?
Oh, I've never done that my whole life. But
there you go.
Yeah,
so there you have it.
That was not in the curriculum growing up, actually. But I get what you're saying. You just kind of, it ingrains in you, even just maybe if you're playing a guitar and the scales, just the repetition of it, I'm not thinking.
How does a painter paint?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you'll find the more experience you have and the more you learn the craft, the faster it's going to be to get the results that you're looking for. I have a friend who has a really wonderful, expensive, proper camera. And because he's so knowledgeable and has so much experience with photography and the sort of how to frame a shot and different types of lenses, he does fantastic work that someone, I have another friend who's kind of just, it seems like they're just picking it up, and their work set side by side is like night and day. So, yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they'll get it. They'll get it. They just need to put more effort in.
Yeah, just keep showing up. That's like even like microphone choice and placement. If you're gonna record a drum kit, I'm sure you could hand me the finest gear ever, and I'll come up with something. But then somebody else that's in the studio every single day doing this can take like 257s and just make it sound like gold.
Well, it's the discipline, and
Yeah.
it's just, do you want to be able to manipulate your sounds? And I teach these classes, so when I'm working with my students, I always have several classes where they just give me YouTube links to songs they like, and they'll timestamp it, and they'll say, what's that sound? How do you make that sound? And sometimes I'll have to simply say, that's a recording of a grand piano played backwards and transposed down by 2 semitones. And then I'll actually have to do that and demonstrate that. And since I don't have their sample, I can't recreate it. Other times it'll be like a chiptune kind of thing. I was trying to figure out what analogy I wanted to use. And that's like always a square. It's like when you're listening to chiptune stuff, you're like, oh, that's a square. So just use a square, open up your filter. So there are just some things that it's like you like, it would be difficult to make authentic cuisines from around the world if you didn't have garlic. But there are other cuisines that don't use garlic at all, like dessert. So it's learning what the garlic is.
Right.
I use a lot of cooking analogies.
It makes a lot of sense, though. I'm curious if you could, it's probably hard for you to do this since it is so natural, but if you could sort of slow down your thinking when somebody presents you with a sound like that in a class, how are you breaking this down in your head? Like, are you listening to this sound in stages, initial attack to decay? And is there a kind of process that's going on? Maybe it's happening so fast now that you don't even notice it.
I do try to slow it down because I'm going too fast for my own head. It's like literally just, and that's not like a humble brag. That's like, I'm a college professor who's been doing this professionally for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. So I should be good at it, I hope. So when I do it, I do explain it. I don't do that magic trick until midway through the semester, so that when I say that's a sawtooth wave, they already know what a sawtooth wave is because that was several modules ago. Or I'm using a low pass filter to make it more muted. I'm using a long release to give it a longer sort of decay, reverby kind of effect. And I've already taught them all of the basics of that. They know what envelopes are. They know what filters are. They know what oscillators. So the reason I put those in is not to be flashy, but to give them concrete examples as to what these tools do and how they can use it in their own way. I'm not trying to tell them how to make music. In their own way to make the sounds that they're hearing in their heads. There was one student who gave me several examples. It was a longer class, and for some reason there were a couple of students missing that day. So I was like, give me more of these YouTube links. And I was like, oh, you just really like low cutoff frequencies. So that was a huge, to me, that was a huge eye-opening moment into what that person's voice is as an artist. And that is they like softer sounds with low cutoff frequencies and longer release times. They were a lot of like Rhodes sounds, like real Rhodes sounds, and very muted sort of trip hop and down tempo kinds of like Massive Attack and Thievery Corporation. So yeah, so pointing that out, a lot of times when students give me that, if I can get a couple of sounds from them and hear what sort of music they listen to and what sort of sounds they gravitate towards, then I can be an even better professor for those students. I always try to customize my classes for the 10 different people in the room and sort of like dial it in so it's almost like a private lesson by finding out what they like, what tonalities they like. Again, with a cutoff frequency was a major insight. So I'm always trying to find out what art that student is trying to create, and give them, a little head start on that.
And how would you recommend somebody work on this? Suppose, we get someone listening who wants to start figuring out how they can create sounds they hear. It's a lot like almost trying to play songs by ear off the radio or whatever. But in this case,
that's how I did it. I got my people asked me about like how I got into preset making, and my first synth was a Moog without presets. So I would put on New Order records with my little Moog and make, Blue Monday. And with regards to designing sounds, just to touch back on that, it was a while before I learned that they used the sample from Radium by Kraftwerk for the choir sound. But once I heard it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's a Kraftwerk sample. So there are certain things that happen. Like when you hear a guitar, most people are not confused about the fact that they are hearing a guitar. So you get this skill of being able to quickly go, oh, that's a guitar. Oh, that's a bass. Oh, that's a vocalist, presumably. So you have this, you get this sort of framework. I think I lost the question a little bit there, but
well, just how you would start learning how to do this stuff.
I would get a synth that didn't allow you to save presets.
Yeah,
I would. That was a thing. I had an SH-101 and the Moog Radio Shack one, the MG1, which I still love. I have there's a Cherry Audio does a really good software version.
That's
of it.
Behind me.
Oh, you have one?
Yeah.
Gall darn it!
It's funny too. I got it at it was the Brooklyn Synth something or other, at a music store, and I put the headphones on and played it for 5 minutes, and an hour went by. Just got sucked into it.
That auto trigger thing on it, where you can like set the LFO to keep retriggering notes, is like you become your own sequencer. So everything's quantized for you as you play it.
I have the problem with mine where there's that foam underneath it, and that was, what is this synth from? I don't know the year, but sometime mid 80s, right?
I can actually tell you that it's going to be 82-ish, 81, 82, between 81 and 83.
So whatever the foam they put in there turns to goo after a while. And a lot of my sliders have these weird crackles, and sometimes they just cut out. But I kind of enjoy that about it. It's a little bit alive.
That's a very Eno-y kind of.
It's a very also. It's also like a more practical, not having to spend some money on repairs, attitude. But it is kind of cool that you're like, what's going to happen when I play with this thing? Because, you know what it's supposed to do, but you're also collaborating with it a little bit.
Note to manufacturers, you know who you are. Those rubberized pitch bend wheels, that were all the rage about 8
Yeah.
years ago? You know, the sort of feels great guitar sound.
Got this, was it the Sub Fatty?
Yeah,
You can't even
I
touch
can't,
that thing.
I can't mention names because many of these companies are my clients.
I
But
can. I love them still, but
don't
my
call them
Sub
out. You're
Fatty
gonna make me
is
look bad. But
sticky.
I hate those, and you'll find it on knobs as well. You'll find that
Uh-huh.
some of the knobs are super rubbery. And there's one synth that is literally in my garage right now, and I wish I could use it, but I can't because of all the degraded plastics and rubber because they sweat.
Really?
And even if it's not in my garage, you know, I have, you know, just sitting in the room over time, this
Yeah.
plastic rubber sweats. So
Hmm.
don't call anybody out, but everybody, when you see one of those, beware.
Yeah. It's a shame. I've been looking for maybe like some wood sides or something for this particular one, but who knows? That's it's hard to predict that stuff, I guess, you know.
Mhm.
But you reminded me of when I first started playing guitar and how different music sounded to me as soon as I started playing guitar, and then I'd be like, "Oh, I that's the acoustic guitar. That's a electric with distortion, or and then that's the bass." Like it
Mhm.
used to just be s- music, maybe drums I could differentiate, but music, drums, and voice. That
Mhm.
was the three things that were in every song, as far as I could tell. And then the dimensions just open as you start learning an instrument, what they sound like.
And close because I really envy people who can just listen to music. I really,
Without, yeah.
really envy that state of mind where you're not. For me, it's subtitles. I always refer to it as subtitles. I can't turn it off. I listen to every track I listen to. It's this synth with this, like the preset just appears in my head. Like, and
Mm.
I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying I have lost some magic. I suspect a fairly large amount of magic in learning how the soup is made. And I
Mm.
miss just being able to go in there with that level of innocence that you can just enjoy music without unintentionally and automatically constantly picking it apart.
Yeah, I get that too. Sometimes I hear songs and I'm like, oh, that's the 1564. There it is again. And but then I'll listen to songs that I loved and realize, oh my God, that's the 1564 progression. Or yeah, it does it distance you from just the straight feeling of the
There's
music.
that's why there's a certain logic to the fact that I never learned music theory properly. And I
Mm.
spoke to one of my colleagues many years ago, and I was like, I I feel like I should take some of our school's music theory classes. How do you feel about it? And this is a music theory teacher, and he said that, you know, your specialty is technology. My department is called audio technology and industry. That's my department. We don't, you know, there's a music department. That's the department he was in. And he said, it's like the difference between speaking a language and writing a language. And if you're capable of speaking, which you obviously are capable of because you've had so many releases and you're, you know, able to teach at a high level the synthesis stuff, if the music you make is the music you like and are intended, you intend to make that music, then you should relax. Because if you look at how many major artists did not go, are not trained in music theory, they picked it up through being around other musicians. You know, a
Mm.
really good example of that would be Prince.
Mm.
There are quite a, you know, there are countless musicians who picked it up because they picked up their instrument and just wrestled with it until it started doing what it wanted to do. I had a really interesting experience with Robert Plant on this topic, this very topic. Uh, I was at South by Southwest, and a colleague of mine was like, "Look, it's Robert Plant. I know him. Would you like to meet him?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!"
Nice.
So we went over and she introduced me as this is Francis. He's an editor at Keyboard Magazine, and he's like, "Oh, you write for one of those magazines that teaches you how to play your instrument." And it was like it was such a, I wasn't angry. It was Robert Plant. I got to talk to him, so for me it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was dismissed. But there's there you have it, that so many musicians are self-taught. And that's what our music theory professor said. If the music you're making is the music you want to make, and it's credible and it's good and it sounds like what you want it to, you should learn the basics of music theory. And that's what I did. So I got the basics in so I can tell you what chord and what chord I'm playing and what key I'm in. So I think that's really important. I also think that so many musicians learn by playing by ear. So many musicians. So anyway, my specialty is technology.
Paul McCartney said something along the lines of not wanting to learn that stuff to not lose the magic of it a little bit.
I kind of agree with it.
He, clearly understands it, just listen to what he does. But sometimes it's a weird feeling, because it's kind of exciting to identify it when you hear something interesting and learn what's happening to make that interesting thing happen. But then it does run the risk of just becoming this technique instead of this. Even like synthesis, as I started learning synthesizers, to me, synthesizers were more like spaceships and, like stars sparkling in the sky. And then they become like arpeggiators, and they become, like you said, like just that's a sawtooth wave with the resonance. There's a temptation to want to learn how it's done. And I think I'm trying to more and more, like when I make sounds, I think in these abstract terms first. And then what do I need to do to get there?
That gives you a lot of trial and error. I didn't have, when I was a teenager listening to New Order, Keyboard Magazine of all things was how I learned. I would read articles in Keyboard Magazine, and I ended up writing for them for 20 years. And that was like a real honor, because I was meeting all of these cult heroes that no one knows unless they read bylines. And I read bylines as a teenager. So when I started working for the magazine, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm meeting you. And they're like, what are you talking about? So it went full circle. And and then I started getting a little bit more of an education on it. But there was really no place you could go to learn synthesis in this era, and I'm really glad that I'm able to impart the knowledge that I've gained from that. So
yeah, it's great. I mean, so much cool stuff. Let me ask you, you mentioned the circuitry, like of the 303, for instance, but what kind of role is that playing in a lot of this stuff? Like, because you've got now digital recreations and the computer, and it's all that stuff minus the circuitry. What do you think's going on there sometimes that's giving these synths their sound?
You have two totally different opinions that conflict with each other. And that's every piece of software, piece of hardware has a different. Hang on a second.
Someone's contributing to the conversation.
Yeah. Take your major third someplace else.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what are we hearing there? Is that a certain oscillator?
We're hearing. Yeah, it sounds like a major third. A lot of car horns are major thirds, so you take that, and usually a sawtooth, and you play, whatever. Anyways, so,
so
getting back to the topic, there's each soft synth has a completely different sound from every other. So if you go get a ton of different soft synths, even if they're analog recreations, they're all going to sound different, and they're all going to have a vibe. One of the reasons that Serum had such traction for so many years, it's been a decade. So the reason Serum has so much traction is because the aliasing is so low, and everybody's like, it sounds too clean, and clean is a good thing because you can always add dirt later. So, but that was one of the reasons it became such a staple in certain kinds of dance music. So Serum has very, very.
Can
very
I get you to give us a aliasing proper definition?
Aliasing is when I'm gonna give a very basic definition of it, because honestly, I don't know that I can get into all the mathiness of it. But aliasing you can hear in a DAW. If you have Ableton, just go look for the bit crusher, and you'll be able to add aliasing to your track, or a form of aliasing, one of the many flavors of aliasing. If you're using Phase Plant, there's a filter in there called quantize, which doesn't sound like a bit crusher, but it is also quantizing the signal. So whenever the signal gets quantized, but that's not the only way. It usually has to do with the combination of bit depth and, more importantly, the sampling rate. If we talk about the Nyquist theorem, oh gosh, you pushed me down this hill. So if you talk about the Nyquist theorem, then the highest frequency in your sample has to be. I wasn't thinking about this right now. So the highest frequency in your sample has to be half of the sampling rate. So if you're recording at 40 kilohertz or 44.1, which is what a CD is, the highest frequency is going to be 22.05. If you go higher, then you're really not going to hear us. But then aliasing kind of transfers back down, which isn't good either. But the sampling rate has to be twice the highest frequency in the sound. That's aliasing. But in a synth, that means that there are aspects of the internal clock that have to be running even faster, so that the frequencies that are generated within the synth are also adhering to this Nyquist theorem. So that's the short and wonky version of it that doesn't have a slide deck. But and I'm sure people are going to complain that I didn't get it right. But
that sparkly sound you get when you turn the bit crusher, that kind of twinkly thing.
That's like the sample. There's a knob called sample rate, and what you're doing is the DAW is operating at the correct sample rate, but then you're taking that specific track and you're making it operate at a sample rate that is lower than the highest frequency. It's got to be twice the highest frequency.
I'm not sure if this is the same, but I've always equated it to like really low bit rate MP3s. How they have that kind of funny, sparkly thing going on in the high end. Is that a form of aliasing? Is due to that?
I believe so. It's also a form of the way MP3s compress. And don't ask me that question. So, but the interesting thing is that what we're talking about with low bitrate MP3s, whenever I listen to these stem separators, I don't know if you've listened to them. Yeah. The best one for me is like the Apple one is the best one that I've heard so far. I haven't heard them all. I haven't done what they used to call a shootout, where you have 10 and you're comparing them. But the ones I have heard, once you've separated out the vocals from the drums, from the bass, from the music, etc., everything sounds like really low bitrate MP3, which tells me a little bit about how they're doing it. It's all Fourier transform stuff, which is probably happening at a very high sample rate. So there you have it.
It's all what transform now?
Fourier transforms. If you're familiar with Aphex Twin, I'll give you an example. It's like a weird left turn that I just made. So what a Fourier transform is ultimately every sound is made up entirely of sine waves. White noise, as they call it, is all sine waves at equal volume. That's one of the ways it is described. It can be made many, many other ways. I'm not saying that that's the final word on noise, but it's all frequencies at equal amplitude is a very common definition for noise. all frequencies, an infinite number of frequencies at equal amplitude. So every sound, the sound of my voice, the sound of your voice, the sound of a guitar, is going to consist of harmonics, but also inharmonics. If you want to make bell sounds, because bells are not mathematically perfect objects, you're going to get frequencies that are not mathematical don't have mathematical relationship to the fundamental. Now I'm talking too fast.
You talk about like harmonic series type of stuff?
There's the harmonic series, but then there are things called inharmonics, which are not related to the harmonic series. And when you combine, like by combining them, you get the actual fingerprint of all the sine waves that are used to make up that sound. But then you also have the phases of the sine waves. And then you also have the envelopes for each individual sine wave. Anybody's ever used the envelopes in Operator for the harmonic series, you can combine them in different ways. Serum has a beautiful harmonic editor. Beautiful. So what an FFT is, the more complex the FFT is, as I understand it, because I'm winging it when it comes to physical modeling. You got to remember that. So as you make a sound, it's going to have frequencies that are both harmonic and inharmonic, and they are going to change in phase and amplitude over time. So when I say, I was just thinking about the sibilants in the letter S, and that's really white noise through a high pass filter coming out of your mouth. So you've got all of these frequencies. So a proper fast Fourier transform is really, when you want it to sound amazing, it's got to have so much detail in terms of all the frequencies that are available. And then what MP3s do is something very similar to that, but then they rely on a technique called masking to get rid of all the frequencies that you're not actually hearing. Because when two sounds share an overlapping frequency range, the louder one is going to obscure the quieter one. Gosh, this is getting really sciencey, and I'm like,
but that happens in mixing, where you have two sounds, say, in like a certain frequency range, and then they're fighting with each other.
I can't wait to see these comments. I'm really looking forward to seeing the comments on this. So, well, actually, Francis, so you got to remember, I'm winging it. I don't have my speaker's notes with me.
It's funny. Maybe because your understanding of this stuff is so up here, but someone like me can talk about this stuff way down here, and I don't get the same kind of blowback. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, it's like the thing is attached to the thing, which is connected to the thing, and then it does the thing. The framostat is connected to the confabulator. It's what a lot of this stuff ends up sounding like.
Yeah.
But with regards to the MP3 artifacts. So when I was talking about, so people are going to say, okay, get back to, I can follow my own breadcrumbs. Get back to Aphex Twin. Aphex Twin has a track, it's often called Equation, that is off of I think it's one of the B-sides to the Window Licker single. And I was actually writing for quite a few magazines. I was writing for 2 magazines at that point in time. So I had reviewed a product called Metasynth that you can still buy, METASYNTH, which has a huge Fourier transform inside it. You can make it very, very large. Now, the interesting thing about that is you can visually represent a Fourier transform. It's like that sort of spectrograms that you see in Isotope, the different colors, when you see these things sort of blended, and like brightness is loudness. So amplitude is covered by how bright the pixel is. So Metasynth had this ability to take a JPEG. I think it had to be a different format, but you would have to feed it a file, and it would take that visual, that image. It could be cottage in the woods. It could be an animal, And in the case of this track by Aphex Twin called Equation, it was his face. It was the famous sort of leering, evil-looking Richard James Aphex Twin face. And using Metasynth, because really the only tool that could do it, using Metasynth, he put his face into the Fourier transform, which was extraordinary at the time if you had if you didn't have Metasynth. But if you had Metasynth, it was like 3 clicks. So I got in trouble for pointing that out once. But he's still the innovator. I'm not saying that he's not a genius. I'm saying he's a genius. Please don't bury me in the comment section. I'm just trying to explain how it was done. So if you put it in Metasynth, you can take the image and transform it in just with like, say, take this graphic and turn it into a Fourier. And that's what the sound you hear in the track called Equation is actually the result of transforming his face into a Fourier. The interesting thing about Serum, if we're going to, while we're going to do this little graphic tangent, Serum allows you to turn images into wavetables. And the things that work particularly well are mountain ranges. And I don't know if it's still on my blog. It might be. But years ago, like less than 10, because Serum's only been out for 10. But I used that tool I made every popular emoji black and white because it tosses out the color. And I put it in the format for Serum. I think it was PNG. And but I did every emoji. And I played with inverting the grayscale and so on and so forth until I made valid wavetables out of every emoji. It's on my LinkedIn page. It's the background on my LinkedIn page. But it's Serum will allow you to take an image and convert it into a wavetable, and that's a really fun trick too. It's all experimentation. It's like, does it sound good?
Yeah.
So
there was a Max for Live device that did that for Ableton's wavetable too, I believe, where you can trap a photo.
Yeah, there was. I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to make a pack of, I think, like my dog or something. I never got around to that.
A dog would be a great, perfectly fine pack for wavetable or in any number of other synths.
Yeah. So. But it's, that's a way to bring in some of that fun, I guess, right? That exploration where if you're afraid you're losing that by getting too technical, now you're kind of letting some magic happen again.
I'm sitting here beating myself up for not getting bit crushing right. So I got it mostly right.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I just wanted some clarification in case anyone was a little off on like, what? It's because sometimes some of these terms, like you said, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really detailed,
language.
Very specific mathy stuff, and I didn't have my speaker's notes. So anyway, apologies to the comment section.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But I wanted to get you back to the circuitry thing with some of like the analog synths.
So every piece of software is going to sound different, and every piece of hardware is going to sound different. So I really like hardware for analog because analog sounds like analog, and I really like software for things that are going to be digital. Like, for instance, Korg has a wonderful recreation of the M1, and Roland has a wonderful recreation of the D50. So since those synths were truly digital to begin with, they sit really nicely on a computer. That's not that I'm saying that virtual analog isn't cutting it, because the processor speeds are so fast right now that there are just wonderful, wonderful recreations of analog that aren't just like playing with the pitch or something like that. So I think there's a certain amount of it that gets into like cooking competition stuff. I'm always going to use these cooking analogies. And is this apple pie better than that apple pie? And if so, why? And I think a lot of it has to do with your ears and, again, your personal tastes. A really good example would be the Roland System 8, which is, it's been around for quite a while, and it can load some of the synths from Roland Cloud, and its analog emulations are actually quite good. The Roland Boutiques are another example of digital synths that sound quite analog. So those are great. Korg has done some wonderful stuff in that territory as well. We've reached the point where processor speeds and and digital to analog converters, which are the tools that go in your audio interface, so that it can actually create electricities for your speakers. So with regards to like the quality of it, you go back to the beginning of this. I don't know if you remember. Now we're going to do a little history lesson. Do you remember a synth called Neon?
Mm-mm.
You're having a different sound. Is there like a tornado coming your way?
Yeah, that's I got a window open. I forgot to shut.
No, it's totally
that's
fine.
the fire station's kind of siren.
So
that's the thing that my dog realizes it's dinner time at 6 o'clock, but it's going off for some reason now. But it sounds like some kind of sine wave of sorts going up in the pitch.
my brain is my brain is really trying to calculate the waveform, which feels very sawtoothy, but also because of the distance, like the Scapes project that I did, because of the distance, there's some filtering on it. And the weirdest thing is, even though you're outside, you're still going to get some kind of reverb just from the fact that there are buildings and objects out there. So you are going to get this kind of reverb.
Well,
and there's a pitch envelope.
I do hear almost like a delay. It almost sounds like 2. Because of some sort of echoing going on.
There's got to be, there's got to be
there's a pond across the street, so there's a lot of space, and I think it's bouncing off all of that. But it does sound like this sort of like 2 things happening.
Two very scary things that are happening.
Yeah, it's just another part of my day.
It just always sound like doom to me. But
yeah, it's dinner time for my dog.
So what I'm thinking, like, just to wrap this up, because I think we should, take a break. So back to the original, now that's going to be in there. Back to the original point is, and there are some fantastic recreations of analog synths out there. So I'm never, ever, ever going to say that software can't do it. Software can do it. It's a bit like being, kind of like you're being a little bit of a snob about it, because especially when things like Roland Cloud and the Korg legacy stuff, which I've worked on all of it. I used to own a Poly 6. I had the MS-20. I've used all these synths. And when I go back and forth, it's really, what's it going to sound like in a mix? That's the thing that everybody forgets when they do the side-by-side comparison, and they've got the tweezers out. And they're looking like at, Ableton Spectrum, and they're like, I hear a little thing. Are you going to hear it in a mix? Are you going to hear it in a mix? And the answer to that is that's subjective. But my personal opinion is, no, you are not going to hear it in a mix. But I also understand that is subjective. So I'm going to say that. So with regards to soft synths versus analog, but I do like my analog synths. I've got a couple of Sequential. I've got the OB6. I just worked on a bunch of really cool synths this year.
I feel like I actually want to call this podcast maybe. Like you talking about coming up with titles for things, and but I was thinking about it today. I was like, maybe this should be called like The Man in Your Synth, because you're pretty much have your hands on like the sounds of almost everything that comes out.
I was once referred to as the ghost in the shell of synthesis. Which is one of my favorite compliments.
That's cool. That's how it feels. And, you sent me over a list of some of the things you've done just this year. And it's like all the cool stuff that just came out.
It's why I love it. I get to do the stuff and then go to school and teach the stuff that I just did. So it's always keeping my content as a professor really fresh. But when you're working freelance in this world, just life in general can be really hit or miss. Like you can have you've got to be really good with money if you're going to work freelance. And, some years are better than others. And this year was just off to a roaring start in December. And I just couldn't believe how many things came in. I do a ton of work for Roland Cloud. I just did a new pack for their Xenology Pro. And that Xenology Pro is a really, really cool synth that I think some of the more EDM crowd kind of miss out on, but it's a very, very complex synth because it's basically 4 synthesizers layered. So it's kind of takes the concept of the JD800. So I did a bunch of packs I did a Xenology Pro pack for Roland. I did the Jupiter pack like tail end of last year. I did a bunch of stuff. So Roland Cloud and that's a really good example of virtual analog that sounds incredibly realistic. So the 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Korg, I got a call in December saying, "Hey, are you free in January?" And I was like, "Yes, of course I am." So I was like, "What's the project?" And it was the Micro Korg 2. And that synth hasn't been updated in like 20 years. It's such a mainstay. And I looked at the new architecture, and the new architecture, it was so much deeper and had a lot more complexity to it. So I worked with Korg very closely on that and several iterations of the firmware. So that was the thing about the Micro Korg. I especially love hardware projects that I know are going to be around for a chunk of time, because hardware is kind of forever. And a lot of people never change the factory presets or only edit them a little bit so that they customize them for their music, which is totally fine. And working on the Korg Micro Korg 2 was still like it's right in the other room. It was just an honor. It's always an honor to do a project of that magnitude. I also worked on another project for Korg that I cannot talk about, which was a lot of fun too.
Ooh, exciting.
So, and then Oberheim. So the new Oberheim TE-05, I have the OB6. I did the OBX8. So I did the Take 5. So the TE-05, and I'm not the only person doing these sounds. Just to be clear, I'm on a team. So, but doing the TE-05, or TO5 as it's often called, because TO, Tom Oberheim. So the TO5 is actually almost in a weird sort of way better than my OB6 and a little bit less. Sorry for saying that, but I hope they sell a ton of these. And working on that, what I do when I'm designing is I always try to make useful and timeless sounds, but this won't surprise you when I say I always try to find the edges of what that synth could do. Because most people are going to make, their saw plugs. It doesn't take long to make a saw plug. So for the sounds that are really detailed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make the synth not sound like the synth, and play to its strengths and find these, like I said, these strange sort of edges where I'm making it do things it wasn't designed to do. I love doing that. And there's a sound that I always test. I like so many synths have a sound. Like one of my tests as I'm designing for it is there's the D50 had a sound called Fantasia, which I've always loved. So whenever I work on a synth, I make a patch called Fantasia, which is me trying to make that synth sound like a D50. And just the process of doing that teaches me where things are on that synth and what it sounds like. Oh, this is what it's going to sound like when it's doing that patch. And a lot of times when I'm making patches, I'll give patches the same name across, across synths. So that came up in a very interesting way with a client that won't be named today. There's a sound that I've made. I'm not going to name the sound either. That the client was like, we see this sound in like a bunch of other synths. What is this name trademarked? And I'm like, no, I just did that sound for a bunch of other synths as well. So there's a certain kind of sound that is reminiscent of the old Oberheim expander, which is one of my favorite synths of all time. And the Oberheim expander had this sound. It was called S.GENVIV. And if we're going to do deep cuts in 80s music, it's the sound that made the primary lead in a Jody Watley track, if you remember Jody Watley from the 80s. So I always loved that sound, and I used it actually in several tracks for my new wave band at the time. But having listened to that sound so many times, I know how it's made. So that's another sound that I add to different synths. Of course, I'm going to make sounds that are like I said, I'm already doing all the edge work, so making really distinctive sounds. But then there are just these sounds that everybody needs. It's like every synth needs a saw pad. That's not in question. Every synth needs like a resonant, funky bass. That's not in question. So all of these sounds that are sort of classic and everyone needs are already in the synth. So I'm looking at the edges, and then I'm sort of doing these deep cuts into the history of synthesis and really famous synthesizers I have known and loved. So that's one of the things that I tend to do, and it's how I test a synthesizer. So I've done Oberheim this year, a bunch of stuff for Roland Cloud. Oh, I've also done some tutorials. That's another thing that's always kind of fun. Roland has had me do quite a few tutorials, and that's obviously my preferred media format because I'm a writer. So I've done quite a few tutorials for Roland's articles. I don't know if you're going to add links to this podcast, there's one in there for it.
Yeah, all of that stuff will go in.
So I do about between like 2 to 4 a year. And it's really enjoyable because it allows me to take my teaching skills and apply them in a different way for a company whose products I love. I'm not saying this because I have to say this. I'm saying it is an honor to have the collection of companies that I'm currently working with, because they're like Roland, Korg, Sequential, Oberheim. It's like, this is, to me, Exford. It's just to me, it's just so meaningful, and I'm so grateful. I never, ever take it for granted, because this is what I wanted to do when I was 14 with my Moog MG1, copying New Order. Only I get to do it, as part of my living. So
it's wild. Do you ever think about how much music your sounds are making it to that gets released every day? Do you ever listen to stuff and be like, I know where that sound came from?
Every once in a while I'll hear a sound that sounds like something I would do. I'm definitely going to say that. I'll hear a track and I'll be like, that sounds like me. But more often than not, I sort of turned that part of my analysis off, because I wouldn't want it to go to my head. It would be very, very bizarre for me to say, all of these songs were made possible by Francis Preve. That's not the way I roll. That's not the way my brain works. So I don't really do that. But every once in a while I'll hear a sound and I'll be like, that sounds like me. So
it's important.
It's strange.
A lot of times, even for me, like, songs start from the sound sometimes. You get inspired. It makes you play something, and it wouldn't happen on a different sound.
So
got that, whatever it is, the personality, something that communicates an emotion.
that's always a goal. That's always a goal with my sounds. I try to make sounds that are really, really timeless so that that synth will still make sense 10 years from now, rather than sometimes you'll get a synth and it's just a little too of the moment. And when you listen to that, I mean, it'd be great if you want that vintage sound 20 years from now, but more often than not, people want things that are going to make sense all the time, because it's a big investment to buy a piece of hardware. It's a big investment to buy a piece of software sometimes. So I want to make sure that my company's clients are getting their money's worth. That's obviously the case. Another thing, like with regards to do my sounds appear in other people's songs, I was once referred to as the Tom Ford of presets, because my stuff is so timeless, and yeah, I guess that person thought it was elegant. I've always been I'm not that into fashion, but I know who Tom Ford is. So I thought that was a really interesting compliment. So I've always sort of held that close to my heart.
Are there certain, like, there's so many synths that come out, and a lot of it's, I guess, like, is a lot of your job finding the personality of the synth? Because if we were given some of these synths with no presets, that, what is the character of this thing? What is it going to be used for? I guess like that's how you're getting them, right? There's nothing on it yet.
There's nothing in them. Yeah.
So you're playing a big role in figuring out what it can do. And
well, that's what these patches, like, the S Genviv and Fantasia, and I have a couple of others that I use when I'm just testing the synth out. But these are sounds, like, again, these are sounds everybody needs. So, and every synth is going to do that sound differently. It's really important to emphasize that each of these sounds are not, it's going to sound different on an Oberheim than it does on a Roland, than it does on a Korg, but they're all like sort of necessary sounds. So just because I designed sounds that were inspired by other sounds that I designed doesn't mean that I'm just phoning it in and making the same sound. I really want to be clear about that. But what I do when I do that is I'm finding out what the personality of the synth is. And sometimes I'll find a synth that just can't do that sound. I'll be like, okay, what can it do? What other experiments can I do to find out what the personality of the synth is? Generally, I get that one right. So I have enough repeat clients that I would think so. But the point is, yeah, every synth has a personality, and part of that personality is the presets. There's a really interesting story about the Prophet 5, the original Prophet 5 from 1978. And that is, the Prophet 5 was the first synth. I mean, we could say the CS80, don't say CS80. The Prophet 5 was the first synth with digital memory for presets. Polyphonic synth. Let's get that one right. So it's the first polyphonic synth with digital memory for presets, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. And there were 32 patches in it, or was it 40? I can't swear by that number. But I will say that it's a famous story that the Prophet 5s, if they needed maintenance or repairs, when they were sent back to Sequential, had the factory presets in them unedited. And I thought that was fascinating, because that made me wonder one of two things. Did people erase their own original presets so that, as sort of like trade secrets? Or were people only using the presets and maybe modifying them by changing the cutoff or the release time? No way to know. But it was known at the time that a significant number of Prophet 5s came back. And we're talking, this is like 1981. So there really weren't synthesis experts the way there are today. There weren't synthesis experts. So it would make a lot of sense that if like a rock keyboardist is going to pick up a synth, they're going to, I need a saw pad. There you have it. Yeah. So you need the saw pad, and that's the Prophet 5 saw pad. So, or the hard sync sound that was now just more old guy deep cuts about new wave, but the Cars one of the big hits was a track called Let's Go. And that was made with a Prophet 5 preset that uses hard sync. So that iconic sound from that track was a Prophet 5 preset. So that's the weird thing, is when I hear presets from bands, synth pop bands that I really admired, and I find them now because you could never afford a Fairlight before. You know, they were $30,000 back in the day, but you can get an iPad version of it. So when I got the iPad version of the Fairlight, I kept stumbling across these sounds that I thought my heroes were making from scratch. And I'm like, no, that's a preset. Yep. And same thing with there are sounds in the PPG that are, so a lot of, and these synths were so expensive back in the day that they were made out of a kind of unobtainium sort of thing. So sure, you're not going to get busted for that preset you used on the $50,000 synth. Of course not. Who's going to ever discover that? Well, fast forward 40 years and it's the iPad version. You're hearing all of these iconic sounds and like soft synth and soft, like whether it's a VST or an iPad. So,
well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. That, I mean, people do that with other instruments, and you know, like a piano, you could look at as a preset if you want. You could look at an acoustic
Sometimes
guitar.
people buy a synth for that sound. They know that, like, you'll see on Reverb that some synths will go really, they'll skyrocket in price because some artist mentioned that that's the synth they use, and now everybody wants that synth because they want that sound. So that's another weird trend that sort of dominates the used gear industry. I think there's so many sleepers out there. I think there are so many great vintage synths that people haven't really noticed, that are really cool sounding. Yeah.
Are you willing to?
Yeah, I'll say something. I used to own most of them, so I know. And you know, you can always get the Arturia version, which is actually quite good. The Ensoniq or Ensoniq, it was pronounced a million different ways. That synth was the SQ80, and it's really cool because it's oscillators that have aliasing, 3 of them, but they could be synced and do all these other tricks, but followed by a Curtis filter. And the Curtis filter what was in the Prophet. So you've got these 3 oscillators that are kind of wonky going into a really creamy, actually analog filter. And you can still find them for like 600, and they are so good. But there's also the Arturia version, which is also excellent.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds, like, what other sleepers are there? A lot of Korg stuff, like the DW8000, DW6000. I'm waiting for somebody to make the Poly 800 popular again, simply because that's another one of those synths that has really unique tone generation, because I believe it's all kind of based on square waves and pulse waves. So I haven't. A friend of mine, I was in a band with a guy who had one. So I don't have one in my home right now. So I don't want to be too concrete about that. But there are these synths. Like, I was super excited when Korg released their virtual version of the Prophecy and the Z1, because they had things like physical modeling. And this is all the early 90s. And it was just like, it was too much synth for that you couldn't quite get into it with the fact that there weren't that many knobs on keyboards anymore. But the software version, you can get at all of these parameters that you never used to be able to get to without using the LCD. So there are a lot of sleepers in that sense, because the software version is actually better. It's a digital synth. There's a software version. Both the Z1 and the Prophecy are real sleepers up from the Korg lineup, and you can get the VSTs. I'm not trying to sound like an ad for Korg, but I am saying that there are these undiscovered vintage synths. Yeah.
That's a good point. Like, because some of it's really hard, especially like those membrane button things that they were doing for a while that were felt futuristic in the 80s, but are really annoying looking back.
The Moog Foundation, the Bob Moog Foundation, to their full name, the Bob Moog Foundation actually did a raffle for the Source, the Moog Source, and that's the sort of like membrane buttons. But by many people's estimation, the Moog Source, which a lot of people didn't want because it looked like it was kind of digital when it was, people don't understand the Moog Source, but it's still all analog, just with a cool membrane interface that just happens to be the Moog that sounds the closest to the Mini Moog that isn't a Mini Moog. So if you want something that's very close to an actual Mini Moog, the vintage Moog Source, it was like when I saw that raffle, I entered it myself, although I'm technically not allowed to win because I'm on the board of advisors, but I would have given it to my school. There are these sleeper synths, and the membrane switches, on the Moog Source it was just an amazing synth. I used to love going to the music store and playing with it.
Yeah, that's cool. It's nice that we've got access to that stuff in more easier to use ways. Even things like a DX7, like the FM synthesis, that you can not have to deal with that. I have one, and I think now the battery's dead, and I almost don't even care because it's so hard to get into it.
That came up in class. That the DX7 presets came up in class and operator this week because a student was talking. I was talking about the DX7, and when I was talking about how one of the sounds that the DX7 is most famous for is the Taco Bell sound.
Yeah.
the Taco Bell bell.
Yeah.
is preset in the DX7 tubular bells, and my students were like, "Can you make that sound?" And I went over to operator and I was like, "There you go." I couldn't believe that my muscle memory allowed me to get operator to cough up the exact DX7 tubular bell sound. It's like a 2-to-1 ratio, but you set the fine tuning to like 700 or something like that, and then next thing you know, it literally sounds like the DX7 tubular bells Taco Bell sound. Recipes.
I'm surprised there's not maybe there is. I'm not aware of it, but like a DX7 pack for operator, so you can just kind of call up some of those really classic, like those electric pianos. And
I did like SympleSound has my like FM collection, which are some samples from the DX7 and the TX81Z, which I owned, and then I threw in an operator pack in there. I'm not exactly sure. It's been like 7 years since I've done it, but so whatever's in that pack, there are audio demos on the website. Yeah. But yeah, a DX7 pack for operator. I'm sure after all this time, I was using operator in 2004 when I was, so I'm sure there's got to be an operator pack that's all DX.
Yeah, but if not,
make
one in an afternoon.
If not, take a little bit more than an afternoon, but yeah. Well, because I have to do the marketing. So
right, exactly. The fun stuff, the stuff that we've all had to learn, getting into all the funny things you get into music. Music gets you into, but that you talk a lot about the teaching, but you've got you mentioned in your email some success stories from your students. That's got to be, I always joke about teaching because it's one of those jobs you do, and at the end of the day, you're just kind of like, wow, I hope I did my job. I hope they learned something. Like, my class is leaving. No one looks any smarter today. Whereas if I cut the grass is cut. I did the grass is cut. Hell, I did that.
It's cumulative, but as a teacher that teaching is cumulative.
It's not a day-to-day, at the end of the day, you can quantify it with so many other things.
Correct. And I want to be very clear about this, because when I gave my talk at Ableton Loop, I said this very thing, is like, I feel like teaching is like gardening. I'm not the DNA. I'm not the seed. I'm the water and the sunshine, and that is it. They are the ones with the perseverance. They are the ones who are cultivating their skills long after they've left my classes. It's like I'm in charge of lighting the fuse, and I will take credit for that. But I do not want to take anything away from any of my students. They are doing the work. But I've got there's an incredible number of students who have come just from the program. So it's like there are multiple classes. I'm not the only teacher. This isn't like School of Francis. So there are a lot of teachers contributing to these students' success and knowledge and experience. So I just want to be very clear about that as we go into this topic. I have a student I had, God, it was pre-pandemic, so we're talking like 2017, 2018, she is now one of the biggest techno DJs in the world. She was just on the cover of DJ Magazine, DJ Mag. Full cover story, full interview. She actually gave me a shout out in the interview, which made me feel so good. Nice. Felt really, really nice. And her name is Sarah Landry, and she's there. She did the things she wanted to do, and we were just texting on Instagram, and I'm actually going to send her the Serum pack. She wants to hear it. So just an amazingly gifted woman. So cool, and just happy to see her success. Also in the DJ world, there's an artist who's on his way up, and he's going to go there, named Shadow Star. And he just opened for Deadmau5 at one of our major venues, which is a really prized gig. And he's had tracks on Mousetrap, Deadmau5's label, and he's had a bunch of releases. His name is Shadow Star, ShadowStar. And he is definitely on the way up. And he's driven. He's really committed to the process, which is why I think he's going to get there, because he doesn't give up. His perseverance skills are amazing, and he's arguably one of the best engineers in Austin. Another really great engineer in Austin, who's more of a friend of mine. I may have mentored him like 15 years ago. His stage name or his artist name is Shredward, but his actual name is Edward, and it's because he played guitar.
That's cool.
And it's like, it'd be like me being called Keys. But his name is Shredward. It's a cool name. He's been around. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's on tour with the B-52s a lot, both as their keyboardist, nice, and as their keyboard tech. It depends on what's needed on the tour. He's worked in all of these different areas of touring, but he's also a really in-demand engineer in Austin. And he's won like BMI awards, and he's working for a company called Liquid Cinema, Inside Tracks, doing like sync libraries for them. He can do it all. He plays guitar, he plays keys, he's using Ableton, he's using Pro Tools. He's like, he's also works for Expert, doing support and other, like, it's just amazing. The sheer range that he has is, I think,
like a couple people.
Yeah, he's like 10 people all in one. And then I have I wasn't a student. Oh, actually, one more student. His name it's pronounced chocolatey, but his name is CHKLTE. And he was many years ago, and he's getting residencies in Ibiza, and really he does this sort of minimal stuff. That's really, so these students, it's like, I'm just lighting the fuse. I'm not doing anything more than saying, this is what the knobs do. And they're making their art with that. So we created a Discord group with Shadowstar, Shredword, and a good friend of mine named Josh Davidson. And he is the lead audio tech. He's really major in the audio. I apologize for not getting exactly right off the top of my head. He's for Gearbox, the video game company. And he really knows his stuff. And he's managing the team that's making all the sounds and sound effects for the Gearbox games. So we have this little thing. It's called The Professionals, and it's like it's Shredword and Shadowstar and Josh and myself, and we're just like sharing each tracks that we're working on. We're like, oh, hey, what do you think of my mix? Does anything need to be changed? Oh, I just started this track. What do you think? Or asking technical questions, like because Josh obviously is building his own PCs. So he was talking about the arduous process of making the best PC in the world for him. So that's sort of like the network. A lot of times these students just go on to bigger and better things and they just wave goodbye. And I'm like, I've got to make more. I got to make more. So Here I am teaching. But it's always wonderful to see. There are no words for it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when you see that with a student, it's just, you don't usually get to find out what happens when they leave for the most part.
No.
So to see that, it's cool. I like
they
that
always write home.
Yeah.
So
I like that you keep this. I can tell you are probably the type of teacher that learns as much as, if not more, than your students learn every time. And it seems like you maintain that with them to keep learning. What do they have to teach, and what can you pick up from them?
There's so much to learn, and I'll get random text messages because students are allowed to be my friend after they graduate. So sometimes we'll trade numbers. So students who have already graduated, we can be social. And I'll get random text messages from other students like Edward Chapa, who's like on tour with the War on Drugs, which is a pretty major tour. And Adrian Benavides, who he does backline Ableton for like Smashing Pumpkins and Daughtry and Charlie XCX. And he's running, Ableton behind the scenes. He's also a great producer who happens to work with his who are all like guys from King Crimson. So it's just like I like, if they want to stay in contact with me, I am here. I'm totally here if you want to reach out. So a lot of my friends in Austin actually are former students. They're all like in their 40s now. So I'll have students who are like in their their mid 30s, late 30s, mid 40s, just because I've been teaching for so long, and we can talk about adult topics. So that's like some just turn into friends, as well as being successful.
Do you notice anything in them? Like, can you see in your classroom, before they start moving on into the world? Do you pick up on certain traits about certain people that you can recognize, like they have potential, they're going somewhere with this?
They all have my eyes. No, I can. Everybody's got a vibe. Everybody's got a vibe. That was a weird joke, but still, they all have a vibe, and they're like, I've got a pair of students who are really. For me, it's about the passion, because the passion comes from I forgot exactly who said this. But if you take a very intelligent student in a given art form, and you take a really passionate student in that same art form, the passionate student is the one who's going to have the career. Because I'm still here. I'm in my, it's like, I hate saying this, but I'm in my 50s. So yeah, the only reason I'm still here and the reason I've had such a colorful career is because I didn't give up and I was passionate. Yeah, I had my new wave band in the 80s. That was moderately successful, but I went on to become a producer. And then I became a graphic designer for 7 years. And then I slipped. It's all slipping on banana peels. I'm always telling students, go find a banana peel to slip on, because that's where the magic is. Like writing for magazines was a banana peel I slipped on because I was at a conference and I was talking to the editor, David Bettino, of a magazine called Music and Computers. And he gave me my first gig. And I said, I'm not a writer. And he's like, well, you know the topic and I'm an editor. Give it a shot. And he was highly complimentary when I turned in the piece. And he said, do you want another? 20 years later, I was still writing for the magazines. It's back in the print era. But so if you had told me that the most rewarding thing, like when I was 18 and just determined to be in Depeche Mode, if you had told me that the most rewarding thing in my life at this age would be a 28-year plus and going career as a college professor and a preset designer, I would not have believed you. But somewhere there, I was a moderately successful DJ. And it was, you have to just be open to everything, and you've got to just slip on a lot of banana peels. And I think that has a lot to do with the diversity of Shred's skill set, is that he's really good at finding banana peels as well. And then when you get the gig, you succeed. You make sure that there's no way to fail by doing the work, and because you're passionate. So it goes back to passion.
Yeah, I think especially in music, it's just, you have to be. There's too many people, it's too challenging to.
Everybody wants your lunch.
Yeah.
And
right.
A lot of it was fun being a writer. I really enjoyed writing, but that's not the main medium right now. Now the main medium is like TikTok and Instagram Reels. And honestly, it's like, I'm gonna, at some point in time, you got to give it to the next generation. So just gonna college professor and preset designer. That's how I think I ride into the sunset, unless I manage to make my dream synth that's been in my head for 5 years now. So
I think you mentioned that the last time we spoke.
Yeah,
it's
always,
it's
like
on air or not.
It's the windmill I've been tilting at for 5 years, and by saying it, like, if anybody wants to learn more about my synth, you can hit the contact button on one of my pages, and we'll talk. But I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's pretty magical. But that's But even if I was just a preset designer and college professor helping people get to their goals, I'm totally happy with that.
Yeah. And that's something you need that passion for too. You have to bring that. You're not lighting a fuse without a flame or a spark, right? So you need to really have that. I find teaching brings that out in me a lot too. Whether we might be talking about a topic in, say, my Berkeley class, and suddenly like, oh yeah, we could do that. Check this out. And next thing you know, I'm sitting there working on a song an hour later and just excited. It's a great way to find that passion if you ever lose it, because when you turn people on to something, it doesn't have to be in a classroom. It could just be your friend that's curious about, your synth or your whatever. That sharing that experience reminds you, oh yeah, this is fun. Like, check this out.
Of course. Yeah. I feel you on that one. I teach a course I also teach a course in advanced digital audio composition. We have like one that's sort of like getting the basics of Ableton down. And then we have one that's more like, how to apply it to making electronic music and warping vocals and recontextualizing and kind of remixing in a way. And it's weird because I designed that course for the 3 of the courses that I teach out of the 4 courses I teach. 3 of them were the school asked me to design courses for the Texas state school system. That's another legacy on it.
Yeah.
But this one class, I do this one really simple game with groove, because understanding groove is like, it's a feel thing. How do you teach feel? How do you teach groove? So I have a really simple experiment. You just make a standard kick, snare, hat pattern, any BPM you want, but don't make the beat too fancy. Make the beat very stripped down. So it's kick, hat, snare, hat, kick, hat, snare, hat kind of thing, or just eighth note hats, and then keep them low in the mix just so that they're kind of in there as a reference point. So simplest beat possible, whatever drum kit you want. And then you have 2 note events.
What was we just got balloons in the
if I did, that's the Mac balloon. Like, I think this does something like fireworks or something.
Yeah, didn't know that.
Anyway, so Macintosh.
Never saw that before.
Yeah, you have to make a certain hand gesture and it'll happen. It's weird. So where was I? have to rewind for a second.
You're making 2 note events.
So you make a bass sound, and you pick a note. E or F is a good, like a low E or F that's in the cool bassy range, and just make 2 16th notes that are both playing the same note. Got it? So you're looking at you fold it, so there's one track, and you just put 2 note events in there with your ultra simple drum pattern. And I give them 10 minutes to just move those 2 events. They can't add any events. They can't change any notes. It's got to be 1 note, 2 events. And I have them move it around. And they fall into a wormhole because it's so interesting to understand groove from that perspective, that you can have the absolute bare minimum kick, snare, hat, playing the simplest groove possible, playing 1 note in the bass. And you just move them around, and some of them feel great and some of them don't. And just by moving those 2 note events around, they find their groove. I'm not telling them what their groove is. I'm just saying the things you like the most are going to be part of your voice as an artist.
So they're just deciding like where these bass notes are going. And
yeah. They've got 2. They can't add any. They can't change any notes. They've
feel
got
good with the kick. Sometimes on and off beat. Sometimes that's cool. And I love those are academic exercises though, that you can get really far with. Whereas sometimes when you're trying to compose, like you said, you want to make this beat real fancy, and I'm gonna just keep throwing things at it. I need more notes. But when you give yourself some kind of limitation like that, then it's like, okay, we got to really find it. We got to.
Limitations are fantastic. I mean, everybody knows that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's such a trope or a cliche that limitations are absolutely everything. Especially now when you've got a piece of software like Ableton that just has 1 million synths and 1 million effects and 1 million Max for Live devices. It's like you've got to it's over. If I were encountering it now for the first time, it would be overwhelming. I just we're going to switch over to 12, and I'm like, this is going to be like, it's always overwhelming because they add so many new features, and yeah. So there's some really great stuff in 12 though that's going to help my classes a lot, like the ability to set keys. And the generative stuff for people who are still getting the hang of making music. So being able to kind of collaborate with the computer without it just being AI and writing your music for you. I think that's really a really healthy approach.
It's fun. I love it. It's like collaborating is a good word for it. You're kind of, you have to still figure it out. You have to still enjoy it. You have to still kind of cultivate it a bit. It's not just writing things for you, but it says like, hey, what about this? What about this? Try that.
There's a a channel on YouTube called Weaver Beats, and it's taught like these
Uh,
AI music generation tools. I like it because he's snarky and
yeah,
funny,
he
and
does it like the news almost, right?
yeah, he does it like the news. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
So,
about.
and there's a lot of personality to it, but I really like. I have subscribed and liked. So, in one of the latest ones, if not the latest one, at the time of this recording, uh, it's these AI music writing software companies. This one person sent in a letter or an email saying, every time I work, I'm trying to work on this track, but it keeps eating my credits because you have to buy a certain number of credits every month in order to
Hmm.
keep making your track. So what you're doing is you're constantly making you're making the AI make the changes that you could know how to make, but you want the AI to do it for you, but it's still taking the same amount of time as if you actually learned and made the track yourself. So that's not what I'm saying. I mean, everybody can be at their skill level that they want, but what's happening is it's triggering the gambling addiction
Yeah, right.
because you buy a ton of credits and then you start giving them your credits and just to make changes to the thing. Okay, I like it, but make it a little bit more this way. And you're getting the dopamine hits just
Hmm.
like you would from making any kind of music. So that's how Facebook works. That's how social media works. That's how all of this internet stuff works, is by giving you little hits of dopamine. And in this particular case, you have to pay for it. So this AI songwriting tool is turning into a gambling addiction.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the next one will be the one. That'll be the jackpot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
that's funny.
Weird.
I'll show you this thing I got recently. Kind of the opposite direction.
I love it. What is it? It's a
It's the
Zoom
Zoom
four
R4.
track?
It's a 4-track. It's a digital 4-track, little bigger than your phone. It's only thicker, you know. Got built-in mics, got mic inputs, and it even has like effects, like amp modeling, so you can just plug your guitar in. It's the fastest thing I've ever used as far as getting ideas down. It's
Right.
like I don't know if you can tell, I got a drum set behind me and the guitar amps. It's just pointed at the drums, move it over here, plug your guitar in, and
Because it's got the microphones.
it's
Yeah.
the simplicity of it though. Like you're saying, things get so complicated, and it's making me, and the I love all the new features in Live 12. I'm enjoying the hell out of it, but there's this other side of me that's just like, just record, just go as fast as I can do it.
What's the
And
sampling rate? I'm giving you a hard time. It's probably really high, like 96K. It's Zoom or 192.
it's I don't know if it is that high, but it does have the 32-bit float, which, and the way they described it is like you can't overload it, and
Right.
you kind of can't. It
Gives you
just
a lot
sort
of
of adjusts.
it gives you a ton of dynamic range.
You got all that headroom, so like you're
That's
not
my
going to
one
really
sentence
clip.
answer. Yeah.
You know, it's great. It's fun. It,
I'm really happy that you're a little too young to have had the 4-track experience, right?
oh no, I did. Yeah, I
You
had the
did? You had
the
the cassette 4-track
Porta
experience?
Studio. Yeah,
Porta Studio thing?
Tascam.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those are fun too. And
Well, you're reliving it. It's great.
yeah, it's a lot like that.
Hmm.
With just that having the microphone in there, so I don't even have to plug in the mic, and it's as fast as you can work. And sometimes that's just there's too much overthinking for me,
Yeah.
without a doubt. Like
Yes.
just question everything. Maybe I should move that kick, or maybe I should. No, I just played it that way. That's what I got.
Yep. Yep.
Next.
Yep. There are all these delaying tactics. Is really what it comes down to, is finding excuses not to finish your track.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like, I know my computer has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tracks that never made it past 32 bars. And I'll go back and I'll render them out. Like when I finish it, when I put a track aside, I used to have this habit of just rendering out like a 32 bar loop so that I had a thumbnail to look at rather than in like I had these little, these little dot wave thumbnails rather than having to open up the project. And then you have like, because you got plugins that are no longer on your machine, etc. And I go back and listen to these and going, why didn't I finish this track? This track had so much potential. So one of the things I advise my students to do, and that's one of the things that sort of has changed for me, is I do not render it until I'm about to cross the finish line. Because I realized that what I did to suck the life out of all of my tracks was render the 2-minute version that I did in the first week and a half and put it in my car or put it on my iPod and listen to it over and over and over in this vaguely egotistical way. And by doing that, I made myself sick of my own material. So my new rule, which is kind of adjacent to what you're talking about with the 4-track, is if I'm not working on the track, I'm not listening to the track. So eventually, when we get to the mixing and mastering stage, it's like, okay, well, now I have to listen to it in my car.
Yeah, you've told me this before. And
did I?
I think about you
Did I do that in an earlier podcast?
I don't remember if it was a podcast or just conversation, but I think about you sometimes when I do this. Because you have a point. Sometimes you just get enough of a kick out of the track, or dopamine, maybe we'll say, to not really need to cross the finish line. And the other issue is sometimes you just fall in love with the incomplete demo. You get that demo-itis and you can never quite match it. Even if it is better, that's
absolutely, because we have fantastic recording studios with like SSLs and Neves and all that at the school. And one time I was determined to make this into a full-blown track with like a big recording studio, and it just like completely sucked the life out of the music I was trying to make.
Yeah.
So that was that's one of the things that don't sometimes, I love so much lo-fi that I should go a little bit easier on myself, because I listen to so much of this sort of like these basement recordings that are like your 4-track recordings you were talking about. I listen to so much of that music that I should just start, thinking about my own music that way. I haven't made music in years, unless a client asks me to. I have a side project that I'm not talking about because something might lure me into finishing tracks, but I don't want to say anything. I don't want to say anything and then suck the life out of it or over promise and under deliver or anything like that. But there is a project that I'm working on that's kind of like making me feel good about making music again.
That's cool.
Most of the time it's just presets and teaching. So
you're definitely a master of keeping your NDAs. You never give away too much information.
Yeah. Snitches get stitches.
Yeah. But sometimes too with that, in this regard, if it's like a musical thing, sometimes, again, if you just talk about it, you sort of get the satisfaction and
then you suck the life out of it again.
Yeah.
Don't talk about things as if they're done until they're done. Yep.
Yeah.
That was that with this, with the Serum pack. With the Serum pack, it was, I couldn't tell it. It's like I'm like making Serum do something completely different and totally unique and very innovative, and I'm the only person who can hear it because there's always like whenever there was one really crazy case where a sound pack vendor, not maker, but vendor, they said you stole all these presets and used them in this undisclosed, I won't tell you the name of the company. You stole all these presets. And I was like, these presets are from a pack that is timestamped on that company's website as being at least a year before your pack. So your person took my pack and made like maybe one or two changes and then gave it and then told you it was original. And that happens. That happens a lot.
That's dirty.
And yeah, presets are a dirty business. There's something really weird about it. But people will take your work. It's like that meme where it's like, I made this. And then the next stick figure is like, I made this. Yeah. So it's a real thing. So I know, and it's like, it makes me sad, but you know, it's like, I'm happy with my life. I think that's probably like the only thing you can really use is comfort.
Yeah, even if that happens though, I guess in the long race, you know, you'll outrun them, you know. Well, you're just doing it. And you're showing up all the time, coming back.
Yeah.
That is a shame though.
Yeah, it's weird. It does happen. You know, so with this physical modeling thing, if you ever see another Serum physical modeling pack, it is absolutely going to be either inspired by or just mine, you know, with a few minor changes. So, because the Serum's been out for 10 years and it's taken me 2 years of that 10 years just to make this. So, you know, I'm not trying to brag too much, but it's like no one else has done it in the past 8 years. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited for people to buy it, support it, experiment with it. It's like, I really like like we were talking about earlier, I really like doing things for a large customer base and hopefully inspiring people to make their own music. So,
yeah. Well, you're doing plenty of that, man. I mean, you're, like I said, the man in the synth.
Thanks, Brian.
It's really cool. It's fun to know that, you know, I'm hearing like your fingerprint in a lot of these things when I play around with it. And
it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, it's cool though. I mean, you've accumulated the knowledge and the skill, and you know, rightfully so. Who better to have behind these patches and behind the wheels here than you? That's why, like you said, repeat customers, people are calling you because they know how to get it done.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Be easy to work with, be really organized, and hit the deadline. That's really kind of what you have to do. Like if you do that and you're good, you're fine. So it's like, there's that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the light is fading and
I see you got these cool LEDs going on.
There's that. Yeah, I could like turn on this anyway. It's a little too intense. So,
well, I'm gonna put links to everything.
Thank you.
So this will all be in the show notes. Check out the pack, your blog too. You know, it's SympleSound. There's so much to investigate, so there'll be pretty robust show notes. And thank you for also supplying me with a lot of that stuff. Is there any place you want to tell people that might not go to these links? You want to send them their way?
Any place you want to?
Any listener, for the listeners that might not see them?
Oh, yeah, go to the Serum Pack store. That's like, just go to the xfurrecords.com Serum Pack store. And that, like, it's like right there. It should be prominently featured. It's like they rotate the featured packs, but like they're whatever the newest ones are that they rotate them around. And like it's like xfurrecords.com, which is the purveyor of Serum. And then at the top of the menu bar, it says preset packs. And you just click on that, and it's only $29. I didn't want to, I see a lot of people do packs that are like 79 or 89 or this or that, and I'm like, I'd much rather make more people happy and have them tell their friends to go buy it. I want to keep the price low enough that people feel guilty if they pirate it. So that's
nice. That's fair, and I mean it expands the whole possibility of that instrument. So it's a cool thing, man. Very awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. And thanks for all your hard work and inspiration. I always love seeing what you do.
Thanks for giving me an
Catching up with
opportunity to
you.
talk about it. Yeah, this is cool.
Cool.
I'll see you in another 3 years.
Hopefully not that long.
Okay.
All right, take care. Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.